Aloha, namaste. This is Radha, and I'm here to talk about our full moon that is happening in Anuradha on the 23rd. So here in Hawaii, it's going to be at the early morning. It's going to be 3:53 a.m., which is 6:53 a.m. in Pacific Daylight Time. So a little bit later in the morning as we get further to the east and through the continental United States, and then even later than that in other locations. This full moon is right in the middle of Scorpio. Scorpio is where the moon is in its lowest vibration, right? We have the hardest time feeling grounded in our emotions. We tend to ride the roller coaster ride of our biggest fears, our deepest shadows. There tends to be a lot of trauma and drama beneath the surface when the moon is in Scorpio. And we can even see, because the moon moves from Libra into Scorpio, I always see this like this, and we're in this portal right now, as I'm making this video, it's the 21st. So the moon is in Libra and it's like making its way into Scorpio, and it's going to be at its exact debilitated degrees actually on the 22nd tomorrow. So it doesn't move into full, or excuse me, that'll be its most intense time. Like, so I can feel it now moving towards that. And then for the actual full moon, it's in this devotional star of Anuradha. But this path from Libra to Scorpio is where we're compromising and we're giving and we're taking and we're trying to, clean up our side of the road and not blame things on other people and all this sort of Libran energy trying to harmonize. And then all of a sudden it just kind of gets the better of us. The star Vishaka that bridges Libra to Scorpio is where we kind of have to go it alone. And that's the opposite of what you want to do when you're trying to connect with people. You want to bring others with you. And all of a sudden you're on this path. And the point is really to recognize not that you have to go alone in life. It's that you have to recognize the ways in which your stories and wounding and all the upbringing that you were given, not just from your familial people, from your parents and from your lineage, but also from the society that you're in, from the schools that you attended, from the crowds in which you've circled, from if you were in sports, from those different, teams that you were on and the ideas of the coaches and what they put on you, all the different things that you've had in your life that have influenced who you've become, have imprinted themselves. And oftentimes there was shadow experiences in each of those events, right? You not feeling good enough in your team or your sport or your drama club or whatever, you not being liked at a certain time or being teased and having to change the way you dress or change the way you act so people will like you again. Maybe that never worked and you went through a whole long swath of your life in your childhood where nobody liked you and you didn't have any friends and you were alone. That brings up those kind of issues. Maybe your parents were really difficult to deal with. Maybe you had to deal with alcoholism or other kinds of things in the home. Maybe, you had to deal with financial challenges. Maybe you had to deal with your parents never around. There's so many things that we all have dealt with in our life. And these experiences imprint upon us. And sometimes we hold the story, right? We'll be like, okay, this happened to me and this defines me in some way. I know I went through, entered college with my stories about what my life had been like growing up. And then I entered the next phase with my stories about, where I am there and what I experienced in my early 20s that brought me to this point. But often what we don't do is deal with the emotions underneath those stories, because the story in and of itself validates us on some level. This is something we all collectively in society have agreed upon as being bad. And so if I say this story, I can receive empathy from other people. I can justify my bad behavior. I can be clingy or, in a tirade or whatever kind of emotional roller coaster I want to be on. And I'm stinging other people first, not because of my story. My story is not actually what's causing anything, because the story could happen to 20 different people and each one of them would have a very different way of bringing that into their being. Right? The same things have happened to however many other people. And there might be some similarities and patterns and things, but generally speaking, when you see a huge test of people who have the same experience, there's a wide variety of reactions that can occur. There might be certain things that happen all the time, and I'm sure that modern psychology would argue with me on that. But I personally know lots of people who have very similar stories and very different ways in which they're responding to it. And so the truth of the matter is that the story is the thing that we're clinging to as our validity, as the thing that makes it okay that we felt bad. But what we're not doing is dealing with the fact that we felt bad, that we actually have some shame or some sadness or some fear or some anger or something that didn't get dealt with. Now, maybe in some cases it did, maybe your parents really knew how to handle the situation and allowed you to release your feelings and emotions. And those people are probably the ones who reckon better with their stories. Other people might have had no space and no place where they could express what they were feeling, and therefore those feelings got very bottled up. But what happens is those emotions get stuck into the corners, the recesses of our being, into the dark places that we don't like to look. And they rear up in other ways when we go through cycles like the moon transiting through Scorpio, where we have this sudden demon coming out of us, and it's all because of this thing that was never dealt with. And we continue to justify and magnify the demon with our story. We let the story become even more morphed and even more of a thing, but we're never dealing with the underlying cause. We're never dealing with what actually happened to us, which was how we felt. Right? That's the part that's the most important to heal. And it's the part we rarely heal in our society. It's just not a big part of what we do. Even in psychotherapy, it's not a common immediate point of address. How did you feel in that situation? Sometimes there's people who access that. And I think more and more parents are learning to talk to their children about their feelings. But certainly those of us who are over, 35 probably did not have a lot of that in our growing up, unless we had very unique, special parents. That wasn't something that was like commonly known in parenting or even with teachers as a way of talking to children about the things that they experienced. So these traumas and dramas come up to the surface, and we end up striking out at people, and oftentimes cutting off our connection with people, because Scorpio is ruled by Mars, where we're individuating ourselves. Libra is ruled by Venus, where we're trying to connect. So we're moving from this land of connection to this land of individuating ourselves. And we're not just individuating ourselves against the other person, we're trying to individuate ourselves against our trauma. Right? We're trying to say, hey, I'm not that either. I'm not identifying with that. But yet it's taking over so much of who we are in these moments, not necessarily all the time, for some people all the time, but for most of us, it's just in the moments of trigger. Right? It's in the moment when our deepest wound is being activated. We're like, okay, and it shows. And we never were able to validate the actual experience we had. We validated the dictates of the experience, perhaps, hopefully we were able to get the actual story out, but we rarely got to get out what we actually felt in that situation. And oftentimes the feelings that people assume we have are not necessarily the ones we have, right? And I think this has been addressed a lot with things like sexual assault, where there's shame involved or embarrassment involved, as opposed to just fear or sadness or anger. So sometimes the feelings of shame and embarrassment are actually the ones we hide the most, because they're embarrassing, right? Because the feeling of shame and embarrassment makes us want to hide it. And so those are the kind of things that might be beneath the surface. So this scorpionic, watery realm that we enter can become very intense for us. And when we pass through that gate from Vishaka into Anuradha, what we're doing is we're coming to a finish line, right? Both stars have this representation of a finish line. And we're seeing this flower, this lotus flower bloom, of like the mud and the muck and all the things that the lotus had to come out of. And it's being able to blossom and say, I can be beautiful even with all this junk that I had to get through in order to get here. Anuradha is, it's literally after Radha. And Radha is the goddess of devotion. She's the goddess who is devoted to God more than anybody else, right? Her supreme attention and love for her beloved, which is Krishna, is unsurpassed. And many people will pray just to her in order to have that experience of devotion towards spirit, God, however you want to understand that. it's like it's too hard to just access God on your own. So we access it through the most devotional aspect of, and she's really a part of him. They're a part of each other. They're two parts to the whole. And he is equally devoted back to her, right? Their love is mutual. And the ruler of Anuradha is Mitra, and Mitra is this god of friendship and devotion. He brings people together. So we can see how this is a nice cooling balm after the like low point of debilitation when the moon passes through the specifically Scorpio side of Vishaka, when we really get into the turmoil and the struggle. And you know, this idea of devotion and offering ourselves to something higher really allows with it a surrender. There's a surrender available here where we're able to recognize that there's only so long we can thrash around in boiling hot water, right? At some point, we have to just allow ourselves and trust that we're going to be okay. There's only so long we can fight the various shadows that we have looming up around us, or that we can struggle with our past and our stories and our histories. At some point, we need to just surrender. And Scorpio is a water sign. So as much as it's ruled by Mars and gives us this agitation and this fight and this like desire to individuate, it also gives us courage and determination, and it gives us our emotions. It's a place where we can release those emotions. And I really see the releasing of the emotions happening, the oceans and the emotions happening in the later part of the star in Jayista, when Indra stabs the belly of the beast and releases the waters back to the earth. I see that being a place where we're able to kind of fight the final leg of the journey. But there's a part where we need to surrender to something higher than ourselves and have trust and faith, even if we're not receiving immediately what we feel like we need. And this is one of the principles or the qualities of Radha that comes up again and again. Her ability to face the fact that Krishna is the beloved to everyone in Vrindavan, that all the gopis are in love with him. And yet she sees that he has eyes just for her, but yet he is giving his love to everyone. She has to reckon with that. She has to reckon with the fact that she has to marry this other man because she was promised to him, and she's, you know, he's part of the cowherd world that she's in, and Krishna is meant to go be a prince, and you know, save the world by fighting off this demon Kansa. Like, he can't not fulfill his dharma. He has to do what he has to do. He has to leave her, and he's going to marry, you know, all these other women, because that's also part of his dharma in becoming prince. And she has to accept staying in Vrindavan, staying in her little world and marrying to someone that she's not in love with, in order to let them both live the life that they need to live. And then one of my favorite stories is when he falls ill at some point, and she gets word that he's not well, and he's been in the castle just deteriorating day by day. And all these doctors have come. And I often tell this story around Shatabishak time, because the 100 healers came and no one could heal him, you know, no one could fix him. And all the different wives and attendants and people that are close to him were asked if they could please do this one thing. There's one doctor who says, I know what he needs. I know what he needs is to take this like dollop of dust off the ground and put it on his forehead. Everyone's like, you can't do that to Krishna. You know, you can't take dirt and put it on a god's head, or even a prince's head. You know, that's disrespectful. And that will put us back on the wheel of time. We're going to accrue more samskara. We're going to live more lives. We're going to be stuck here on earth more. And this is a lot of the yogic idea, right? Is that we're here to clear our samskaras, get off the wheel of time, and enter into oneness. Well, the tantric philosophy might have us more present with our actual lived experience here on earth and our body and our connection and union even with other people. And Radha gets to the castle, walks in, the doctor tells her, you know, this is what needs to be done. And she doesn't even think, she just gets that dust, puts it right on his head. Well, that's what he needs, then that's what he needs. You know, if you're telling me this is how to save my love, then this is how I'm going to save my love. And he instantly heals. And she also instantly transforms. She doesn't go back on a wheel of time and get caught back into the thing that everyone was afraid of. She actually becomes exalted into his equal and into that goddess status. She embodies many say that she's part of Lakshmi, right? That Lakshmi came down to be with Vishnu in this form, and actually in several of his other wives' forms as well. And she gets to fully embody that goddess energy and be with him forever. They were always together from the moment they met, but they also now have this bond where she's been uplifted just by this simple act. And it's the act of not thinking about the karmic effect on ourselves in like a selfish way. How is this going to, sometimes you might see like you're late for something and somebody needs some old lady is having trouble crossing the street or getting in the store that you're going into. And it's like a little struggle, do I stop and be late for this important meeting I'm going to and help this old person? Or do I just go do the thing I need to do and hope someone else is going to help this person? We've all been in situations like this. And I'm willing to bet that most of us have made a variety of choices in that situation, depending on how important that meeting is, depending on how much that person's struggling in front of us. Like if the person's really struggling, we probably just deal with them, because if somebody's really, in a hard way, most people feel compelled to help them. If the meeting is, super important, or wherever we have to be is super important, and there's a lot of consequences to being late, we might be more inclined to go with that. But we all like to think of ourselves as someone who would help in a situation, but we don't always. And this energy is part of the problem in our world, right? Is that we're so busy on our own path of strengthening ourselves, finding our way, making money or taking care of our individual families, because we don't have that community where someone else is going to step in and take care of our family. Most parents have to worry if they don't pick their kid up at school on time, they get charged X amount of dollars per minute, for being late to pick up their kid. Or there's so many factors in our daily life. There's so much around time and being on time for these different things that we struggle to open our hearts in moment to moment situations to one another as vehicles of source, as literally the person in front of you is God. And that's a difficult concept to understand, right? But how are you ever to understand yourself as God if you can't see the person in front of you as God? And how are you ever to understand and accept your own fallibility and your own deep wounding and emotions that never got looked at if you can't also offer that to the person in front of you? So there's this mutuality that comes, and it's different than the mutuality in Libra, right? The mutuality in Libra is really focused around harmony and making the outside circumstances pleasant for everyone involved. How can we all be happy? How can we all still enjoy this dinner party? How can things look beautiful? That's very different than deep mutuality, compassion, understanding. It gets messy. The dinner party's not going off without a hitch, but this person needs our attention right now. And how many of us as children or as parents now can reflect upon our relationships with our own children, didn't get to be messy with our emotions when we needed to, because we were in a public place, you were in church, or you were in the grocery store, or you were in whatever environment you were in, and you weren't allowed to act out. You weren't allowed to express your emotions. That's called acting out. And so we see that repression in us as we get to be adults, where we're never willing to put ourselves forward, even when it's not church or a meeting or the grocery store, even when it's like an intimate conversation with a friend or a time when somebody's asking you how you're doing, the instinct is to say, I'm fine, and to make everything pleasant. And if you mention anything unpleasant, to explain why it's not that bad or why you're okay, because we have this, this desire to have, to have harmony and to not be the one bringing everything down. And then we see those few people who are really the ones that want to bring everybody down, right? Their whole thing in life is to talk about how bad everything is, how hard everything is, and how much they're a victim of life. And we kind of revile that, right? We're like, oh, those people are pain, but they're reflecting to us all our own repressed shadows, all the things that we refuse to look at within ourselves. So this is a lot of what we can look at here in Anuradha. And when we think about that word, there's Aradhana, which is devotion, which has Radha in it. It has Aradhana. And then we have, or Aradhana. And then there's Shraddha, which is faith, which also has that root in it. And the root itself of Radha is, it has to do with giving and, wealth. Da, the suffix is around wealth. And so there's a giving of wealth. And much like we talk about with Lakshmi, it's a spiritual wealth. The abundance that comes when love is just pouring out of you. And there's not a need for an immediate return on that, because we are filled with the bliss of it within ourselves, because it is returned. It is returned. God's love, right? The highest love, spiritual love, whatever you want to call it. Again, I actually can use the word God and love interchangeably. That is always filling us. When we're focused on that, we're filled with that. And the external versions of love, we start to understand in a different way, that it's either pure love or it's something else. It's a relationship, or it's a, mutual exchange, or it's lust, or whatever the different aspects of it are, but that's not the same. Pure love is not, there's nothing that can contain it. It just is. And this is where we really need to send our energy on this full moon. And we can see here, we have this Jupiter-Venus conjunction across the way from our sun and across the way from our moon, and joined our sun. Well, Jupiter and Venus are these two gurus that are battling it out in this Taurian Yuddha, this war of ideals and philosophies and pleasure and earthly happiness. And Jupiter's in Venus's sign, so Venus is the one who's holding court in this space. This is her terrain: food, pleasure, enjoyment, relaxation, finding the truth in beautifying the daily details of life. And so we're more inclined towards that tantric path right now than the yogic one. We're not sitting on mountaintops denying ourselves of things. I mean, you might be, depending on where your rising sign is, but the truth of the moment is finding that in our connections with ourself, first and foremost. So with our own love for our own body, our own care for our own body, in a nourishing way, in a sweet way, in a beautiful way, not in a harsh, unforgiving way, not harsh exercise routines that get us up in the morning and, have us grueling for hours before we're even allowed to have anything to eat, or these, crazy times of fast. This is a time to be gentle and kind with ourselves. And also at the same time, maintain self-care and maintain, some moderation, because Jupiter in Venus's sign of Taurus can lead to excess, as I've talked about, in the Jupiter and Taurus transit, which you can look at if you need a little more insight into that. And I just had an amazing conversation with my Patreon group about the Ayurvedic implications of Jupiter and Taurus and how we can balance that extra Kaphic energy out, because there is a tendency towards maybe being a little more lethargic here, or overconsumption of sweets and things like that. But there's also an opportunity for that more Jupiterian part of us, and particularly people who are Jupiterian, so maybe a Sagittarius lagna or a Pisces lagna, to find the wisdom in caring for our body, and in having that be a beautiful and lovely experience, and in nourishing ourselves, not just with sort of wisdom and ideals, but also with these very tangible fruits of the earth and fruits of pleasure, even things like sex, right? Even things like eating amazing meals full of all the different tastes and flavors, and including, of course, the dessert that Jupiter's going to want there. And in making our temples or our spaces of spiritual practice very beautiful and conducive to our comfort and our ease and our connection with others. These are all things that can come up in this time, and they're exactly conjunct, right before this full moon. You can see Venus is just past Jupiter. So she's just really saying, yeah, you know what, buddy, at the end of the day right now, this is my court, and we're going to enjoy this. This is going to be fun. And she's moves quite a bit faster than Jupiter. So by the 27th, we already have her in Rohini, and the sun too. The sun moves in even sooner than that on the 25th, it looks like. So we have that energy of Rohini, which is a much more stable place in Taurus. Like the beginning of Taurus and Kritika, we still have this edge to us. Kritika, we're cutting things off. We're, there's Agni, the fire god, ruling it. There's this sun, the sun is the planetary ruler of the star. There's this energy that's still very penetrating, very cutting, and very much there's still a quality of not being fully settled in the Taurian vibe yet. So once she moves into Rohini, and so does the sun, we start to really vibe in the enjoyment, the pleasure, and just being almost, childlike in how much we enjoy everything around us. And this reflection on our moon is reminding us too that, all the instability, all the shadows and everything that we need to experience that we might be going through in this moment can be made okay if we just bring them up to the table, let them have a bite to eat, serve your fear some cake, serve a glass of wine to your sadness, not literally, don't eat or drink your sorrows away, but I just mean acknowledge their presence, invite them to the table, allow them to be there. And that is how we release things. We don't release things by continuing to stuff them down and staying attached to stories. That's where I was going with that. We also have a bit of a Saturn drishti on this moon, although it's really going to move more into it as the moon moves past the full moon itself. So more into the 24th, we'll see Saturn giving his 10th house drishti to our moon and really reminding us of our commitments to the greater world, right? We can't just kind of indulge in either our emotional drama or our physical pleasure. We also have this sort of greater world society picture that's happening right now. And whether that has to do with your specific work, the community you live in, or the greater world we're in, and the challenges that we're facing right now, sort of remembering that if you're enjoying your pleasure over here or allowing yourself to do all this, deep, intense shadow work, that there is a part where that can get kind of selfish, right? Both Scorpio and Taurus can get kind of selfish and self-involved. And it's that reminder of everything else that needs to be held up and that needs to happen. And of course, the ruler of Scorpio being Mars and having just passed out of exact conjunction with Rahu is another big factor here because they're still quite close. And Mars's energy is, starting to diffuse a little, but it's really been sprayed out. We've really been like exaggerating the Mars warrior part of ourselves. It's in Pisces where there's a bit more of a cooler vibration and a willingness to look at beliefs and spiritual qualities and try to find oneness in our philosophies, but we're still very much trying to define ourselves as separate beings. And Rahu always brings confusion. It always magnifies things. And Scorpio, like I said, has a lot of those imagined fears built in. There's a lot where we're blowing up into being these big dragons and demons that really might just be tiny little insects that can easily be squashed. So we have to recognize that ruler having the influence of Rahu right now in a very dreamy realm can bring us strong insight, into something that we can do or some way in which we can complete this path that we're on of trying to strengthen ourselves and trying to become the spiritual warriors that we are. But it can also really exaggerate the experience along the way. And particularly, if Mars is your ruling planet or, rule some other specific area of your life that's structural, it can really inflate how much that's important, how much your relationship's important if it's your 7th lord, or how much your stature and your career and your reputation are such a big thing if it's your 10th lord. Like there's a lot that can come up with that Rahu Mars energy. And just over the weekend, particularly Sunday and Monday, it was like exact, and we could really see like accidents coming up and arguments and things like that. So that energy is still there, and maybe we're even roiling with some of the emotions from that as we move into this Scorpio moon. So I'm going to stop there for now. There's always more to share, and I really appreciate all of you being here. If you enjoy my videos, you can subscribe or like this to help yourself receive notification when I do the videos, and also to help me. And if you are interested in working with me, you can go to my website at radhahomeastrology.com. I have various different ways you can work with me one-on-one. And if you like the group setting and you want to find out about how these different transits affect you personally, so how every full moon, every new moon, every transit with Jupiter and Saturn and Rahu and Ketu, like the bigger transits as well as the smaller transits that happen weekly. I break those down for each of the 12 signs in my Patreon group, and you can go to that at patreon.com, Radha Home Astrology. I hope to see you somewhere soon, and blessed full moon. Namaste.